welcome to the At Peace Parents podcast. I'm Casey, and I'm here to empower you in your decision-making as a parent of a demand-avoidant child. My goal is to share insights that will generate aha moments and support your connection with your child. I'm a mom of two amazing little boys, one of whom is PDA, and I've worked with hundreds of parents just like you to teach them how to lead their child out of burnout and find the clarity, peace, and sense of community they need. All right, welcome Kelly Edwards from the 90-Minute School Day. I'm so excited to have you here on the At Peace Parents podcast. Welcome.
Thank you, Casey, for having me. I'm honored to be here, and I'm so excited for this conversation.
Me too. I think it's very timely and very supportive of the community of parents of PDA children and teens, because many PDA children and teens, as you know, cannot access school outside of the home, whether it's a period of burnout or it is a state that they need to have for years where they're not outside of the home accessing a school environment. So I'm excited to draw on your expertise, learn about your framework, and just hear more about the work that you do. So thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm also excited for this conversation. I feel like these conversations just help drive more awareness and more acceptance and more ability to accommodate our learners in different capacities. So
very cool. All right. So Kelly, can you tell us a little bit about the work that you do with the 90-Minute School Day and how you came to start your business and focus your profession on the work that you do?
Absolutely. Where the 90-Minute School Day started and where it has kind of grown to is that I help families who have neurodivergent children and or the adults are neurodivergent themselves. And what we do is we work within the 90-Minute School Day framework. It's a framework and a system. It's an approach that is designed to move parents away from the rigid, rigorous structure of conventional education, whether it's in a brick and mortar school environment or it is like a structured school at home approach. And so we're moving away from that, and it's going towards like a flexible, person-centered learning environment at home that I like to call natural learning, but it's also can be called self-directed learning, like eclectic homeschooling or unschooling. Mm-hmm. And so the 90-Minute School Day was born out of my own journey through homeschooling. We left the school system for my oldest daughter because of attachment. I'm a foster adoptive mom of all three of my girls. They're 16, 10, and 6 at the time of this recording. And being able to help facilitate like holistic learning, not just academics, like the soft skills of interpersonal. And then my youngest is PDA. And so kind of the progression was that my youngest being PDA, we didn't know that when I started 90-Minute School Day. We were using a trauma-informed approach. It's interlaced with neurodiverse affirming kind of concepts. And so that's kind of where I started working with PDA parents, is realizing that my daughter was PDA, and the top-down approach kind of the conventional school system doesn't work for PDAers because of their drive for autonomy and equality, that the school system just isn't really designed to accommodate. Yeah, so I'll just pause there.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that I'm hearing you say that I think will be really relevant to our listeners is the top-down approach not necessarily being applicable either in the school environment or as a homeschooling structure, right? So what I find a lot with families I work with is that the first step that they take towards education in the home is, okay, I'm pulling my child out of the school environment because of sensory overwhelm and social communication differences. And so when they're not around all these other kids and sounds, they're going to do much better. And we're just going to repeat sort of the curriculum and structure at home. But then the PDA kids don't do better, and they resist everything because what was actually driving the resistance to going to school or in the school was to the losses of autonomy and not being able to direct their own education. Mm-hmm. Is that sort of also what you find with the families that you work with PDA kids?
Yeah, in the school system or a school at home approach, the adult, whether it's the teacher or the parent, has the control over how time is spent, right? The control of like how the child is sitting, right? Like, we're reading now, please sit still and be quiet, or let's go do some math at the table. Like, that's losses of autonomy and equality because the adult in the situation is putting themselves above the PDA. And even over their interests and actions, it's like, hey, this is what we're learning today. And so all of this kind of builds up as an accumulation in their nervous system that, depending on the day, how integrated they are, it can be an absolute disaster. Or sometimes that approach may work. I mean, it's just so independent on the learner, but it doesn't work consistently. And so that's really where my work with parents comes in, is like walking away from that understanding of learning and education. And for the parent, a lot of the work that I do is giving the parents a lot of information that learning can happen just as well and better for a PDA child because we are honoring what their nervous system needs, which is autonomy and equality. And by making the accommodations of, I'm the safe nervous system, we're going to learn about your interests. And through that comes all the academics, right? By being person-centered and interest-driven, everything is connected. And so those academic subjects come out of that, and we're able to maintain safety in the nervous system.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, so you mentioned that you have a PDA daughter, but she's your third,
Yes.
right? 6 years old at the time of this recording. So can you tell us about how you learned about PDA or realized your daughter was PDA and how that learning about PDA fit into the work you were already doing or shifted it slightly? Like, did it shift your perspective at all, or was it more like, oh, this is the perfect framework for this type of child?
I think it was both and I love both and. It's so much easier to go through both and than either or. But to kind of answer your question, I found out about PDA listening to a podcast sometime like she was an old 3 turning 4. And I just remember I was just listening to a podcast and I don't remember what it was, unfortunately. But I had this light bulb go off of like, this is it. This is her neurotype, because we were just puzzled. We couldn't quite figure out what was going on. But then as I heard this, it was like, check, 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 check. This is what's going on. And it made so much sense because what we were struggling with is that her behavior, and I deeply believe that behavior is communication, was conflicted. Like sometimes she would just be off the rails and she'd be like in total fight or flight, losing her ever loving mind. And then on like a different day or a different time, a similar situation didn't bother her.
Yeah.
And so it just kind of felt like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. It was just all the things, right? And so hearing about PDA, and then of course I went way down the wormhole.
Of course.
And it was clarifying for me because a lot of what we were doing was actually working. But then understanding about the fact that she goes into fight or flight over a loss of autonomy and equality was a game changer for us. And that's how we could start reframing our thinking, because we were at the time still like, and she was little too, which is something to know. Like when you're 3 or 4, there's just more that I need to do to keep you alive.
Yeah.
It was setting off her nervous system that I could retool with this like different lens we were looking through. And so embracing unschooling with her in particular, like my oldest daughter, she's more content with like a structured learning approach, which the 90-minute school day can accommodate for her. But like my little person down here, my PDAer, she needed to be in full control of her education. And the 90-minute school day works both ways because it's a rubric that in a structure that the parent holds in their mind to either forward plan, like I can do with my oldest, or reverse plan, which I do with my youngest. So like this morning, she's normally watching TV, but her 10-year-old sister was up with her and they were playing like Boggle Jr. And I was like, oh, look at this. And it was directed by her. She's really working on decoding. That's what she's interested in right now. It's a special interest. And so I'm able to watch how she goes about her day and note and see the learning for logging purposes, and then just for my own confidence that this is working. And I test her every year. So we do standardized testing to remain in compliance with our state. And she's a brilliant kid and she's able to do that. But it is funny. We'll see if we can continue to keep testing her because like
Yeah.
I was watching her take the test and she was just answering incorrectly just because of the demands.
Oh, totally, totally. Yeah. Like I know the answer, but I'm going to answer it differently because equalizing.
She totally did, but we did it in small little batches and it was invitational. And she still, even the answers that she answered incorrectly, I was like, well, we might just have to do a portfolio, which is the other way we can do it.
Yeah.
But she still scored really high. So so far so good.
That's awesome. Well, you're leading me into the next question, which is awesome. Can you tell us what is the 90-minute school day framework? So, like, let's say I am a new client to your
Mhm.
business, and I'm like, I have a PDA kid, and I've just pulled them from school, and they might be in burnout, right?
Mm.
So, I love that you mentioned that the 90-minute school day can be applied differently to different learners and potentially differently to different stages of the same learner with
Mhm.
like a PDA or a burnout who's then going
Yes.
to move towards more of a thinking brain state once they're out of burnout. I'm the client and I'm like, my kid can't do school. We just pulled them. It was a disaster. They don't, every time I speak to them, they say, stop talking. All they want to do is be on screens. Like, where do we start with this 90-minute framework? What is it and where do we start?
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm going to affirm everything that you're going through, right? Because like you're in burnout too, right? And recognizing that and recognizing that you are fully equipped to lead your child through this process. And also encouraging this parent because it's really scary, right? It's really scary to leave the known and to leave your expectations on how parenting is supposed to go and do something radical like homeschooling. And then it seems like at this point you recognize you need to unschool, which is even more scary
Yeah.
because you're just like, my kid's
I
in
didn't know
burnout.
what. I
I
don't
can't.
fit in anywhere.
Yeah, and like and we're conditioned by society and by a lot of research, but there's more research coming out showing how screens are actually beneficial to kids, and especially if they are autistic, and how that they can learn from screens because of the lack of demands, right? Like, you're
Yeah.
learning from someone who doesn't have any emotional energy on you because it's in a screen. So for this parent, what I would say is your job right now is to heal your nervous system so that you can help them in their healing process. And while you're doing this, you as the parent because you're coming to me. So you're willing to make some changes. Me and you, whether it's one-on-one coaching or if you're in one of my group coaching containers, we are going to walk through deschooling. And that is the mindset shift you need around learning. And you need information because I'm assuming that this parent is coming from a very like classic kids can't learn how to read if they don't go to school. They're not going to learn higher level math. They're not going to be able to do any of this. They're not going to be able to go to college. And then you're spiraling, right? Like
Yeah.
doom, doom, doom everywhere. They're just going to sit in front of a screen in my basement for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And I know that because like I've obviously been there. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to like really work on healing the nervous system, prioritizing that first. So if they need to sit in front of the screens, and obviously that's a parenting value decision on what kind of screens, and that's a more of a parenting thing. But if they're going to be in front of screens, you and I are going to work together to see the learning that is happening and to support their nervous system, and then learn the 90-minute school day method, get really comfortable with it. And the best way to learn it is through observation. So when your child is, moving through burnout, screens all the time, needing a safe nervous system, needing to be diving into their interests when their interests are in screens, but then they have interests off of screens. And as they start to heal their nervous system, they make these progressions, right? And so you're noticing and supporting them. And this is how you're noticing the formal academics that are happening already, but then you can start to offer other opportunities to broaden their horizons once their nervous system is more established through the framework as invitations. So
Mhm.
like my 16-year-old through the framework, I can just like offer her things to do and we can talk about it. And it's like more structured. It's a little bit more comfortable for parents. For a PDAer, it's an offering with no judgment. That's the whole thing with strewing is like you can put it out there, whether it's a verbal strew or it's something in their environment or it's an idea on top of an idea. But if they don't take you up on it, you cannot get your feelings hurt. Don't put a lot of energy into this because it might get rejected. You got to just let it go, right?
Yeah.
And so that is really how this framework helps parents, especially in this situation where the child's in burnout, the parent's nervous system is totally fried also, grasp something that gives them some hope and then something to work on. Like that observation is, you learn
Yeah.
so much by observation. You know this, you're a scientist.
Yeah. So just to ground it, like as the client. So Kelly, is what you're saying that for 90 minutes a day, my job in the deschooling/healing phase
Mhm.
is just to be noticing for 90 minutes a day, even if they're on the screen all day, but 90 minutes a day, I'm using your tools, observe and potentially provide that nervous system support while I observe them, what they're doing on the screen and where the glimmers of learning might be initially.
Yes, I'll clear it up just a little bit because in this phase and burnout, you're going to use the framework. So it's in 6 parts and they're broken
Oh,
into two containers. It's the framework. It's not necessarily the time. The time is for parents once you can start offering them as invitations when we're a little bit farther out of the burnout kind of like, journey because it
got
is
it.
a
Got it.
journey as we're starting to get more stabilized in our nervous system. At this point, you're just going to be looking through the 6-part rubric, which I can get into here in a minute, to pull out the learning, to parse the learning that's happening in that screen or in the Lego that they're working. You can see beyond the play or the enjoyment factor because a lot of parents don't value what the child is doing because they don't understand all the learning that is
Right.
happening.
Yeah.
And so that's really where it starts. And then when we get to a point where we can start to partner with our child, then the 90 minutes is really just for the parent. It's their time commitment because children and us as adults also, we are learning all the time, like all the time. Learning is happening all the time. And that really, once we kind of really start to embrace that fact and lean into that new paradigm, we're able to move forward with confidence.
Yeah. Just to offer, so now I'm switching out of your potential client mode back into Casey mode. So I
Welcome
remember,
back, Casey.
thanks. I remember when I sort of gave up on screen time limits because I was just at a loss. And this was my son, how old was he? It must have been 5.5. And, he had been in burnout for like a year, but I had like been trying to do the structure because I was still working through a sensory processing lens. So he was home a lot and I was trying to do the structure of like, 30 minutes outside and then we work on reading and then we have art and screen time limits I was still adhering to. And I had my little one home as well, who was like 1.5 at the time. And I remember I just like reached a point where I couldn't fight him anymore. And I was like, fine, if you want to be on the screen, be on the screen. I'm gonna like sit you on the couch and open the front door so that I can at least get the like 1.5-year-old some fresh air and I'll be in earshot of you. So he would be like watching like a superhero cartoon and then he'd also have his iPad in front of him. And obviously, we had parent controls on it and I was somewhat
Mhm.
within earshot. But what I saw over time, so this was like 12-hour days, more or less, with some breaks for food. And sometimes he'd come out if I didn't ask him to see what we
Right.
were doing. But he started to practice a skill that he had learned when he was like 2.5. He learned to write his name. And then he, for the
Mhm.
next 3 years, would refuse to write or draw unless he was forced to. But then that would be in like occupational therapy. And then he would like have the big explosion afterwards. But he refused to do that. Right. But then I saw him, he would pause the screen on the television and he would pause his iPad and I have binders full of this. He would draw robots and superheroes, right? And he spent like an entire summer doing that. And I have like 3 binders full of these. And what's interesting is that I had a friend who's an educator go through those binders with me, and they were all 3. Every image was 3, like 1, 2, 3. And he went into burnout around the time my second son was born when we were moving from 3 in the family to 4.
Wow.
Yeah, and she's like, this, he's processing something,
Mhm.
not only practicing a skill, but processing something. And then it was about 3 months that he did that, and then he just stopped drawing those three robots.
Yeah, he had integrated it, right? Like there's this ITR therapy we explored with our oldest, and it's about like writing the story because when you have a trauma, it gets stuck in the right side of your brain. And so we need to finish the story. And when you finish the story, it can move over to the left side and be filed away. And you've completed that trauma cycle, right? And so otherwise it gets stuck. We get fragmented parts. That's what I'm hearing with this story. In addition to like, this is writing as well, like not only the fine motor aspects of writing, but like he's also storytelling. Like he knew what he was drawing and he doesn't need to communicate it outside of him because it's internalized to the learner, right? He's intrinsically motivated to do this work. And when we follow our intuition, this is such a beautiful thing for him to have learned in such a difficult time of his life that you allowed him to be able to listen to his body to do what was kind of his body knows what to do. Like we know intuitively the right things for our kids and ourselves, and we doubt ourselves because of an expert or something that we've been told or conditioned to believe from outside of us. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm like about to walk us way far off this subject,
Well,
but
I think like if I had had someone like you to be
Mhm,
like, this is part of a process, you're in the deschooling phase.
mhm,
He is like, you're observing this thing that is meaningful. Because I
mhm.
only had that looking back.
Right.
But in the moment, I was like, I felt horrendous looking at
Yeah.
it every day on the screen. And it was only in retrospect and with an outside perspective that I could even start to understand that this wasn't just me giving up his screen addiction and he's never going to learn anything,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And in that moment, it was like I was alone in that as a parent of just like, I suck.
Yeah. Which is super painful and disorienting, right? But you had reached a point where like you couldn't do it anymore. You couldn't do all the right things that everybody was telling you that like all of that. Because if I'm hearing you correctly and I'm putting myself in your shoes from my own situation and experience with my kids, is like you're at the point where you're like, I'm hanging on by a thread. I'm literally about to be like ready to go to a mental hospital
And
and
it would
be
feel like a vacation. Thank you very much.
yes, it's looking really good, 100%. And
Sign me
like,
up.
yeah, and you can feel it in your body, like you're fraying to a point that like you don't know if you're going to be able to come back from it. And so, looking at that, the screens don't matter. Like parental controls, I need the break from you. You need the break from me. And then I've got this other kid who really needs me to like focus on them, keeping them alive because they're a year and a half, right?
Yeah.
And so, and I loved how like your own body and your own intuition, whether you realized it at the time, because it sounds to me like you left the door open for safety, but that was a strew, right? And it was also like you offering your nervous system, you were a little farther away than maybe he would want, but you were still present and acknowledging him. So your nervous system was there because there was kind of like a channel to you, right?
Yeah.
And then there's a strew of the open door. I do this a lot when I want my kids to go outside. I just leave the door open. Like, because nature also co-regulates with us, right? Nature is a nervous system. And so, like, you probably needed like nature to give you a hug.
Yeah, totally. Oh, yeah, those days were so tricky. I really could have used your 90-day framework.
I could have used it back in my early days. Where was I back
Yeah,
then?
I know, I know.
The hard way.
So, you just mentioned it didn't feel like a choice for me. It felt like a necessity, as you touched on. But I think for a lot of parents, we don't want them to get to the point where it's like mental institution or screens, right? So when you are working with parents of PDA children and teens, where are the points that you're finding parents get stuck, either taking the leap of pulling the children out of school or the teen out of like a traditional school or a private school and or starting to implement this framework and like sort of different a paradigm to learning.
Yeah, that's a good question. So first, when we're thinking about like taking the leap, right? Okay, I'm going to do this really scary thing because at this point, I don't know what else to do, right? The parents get really stuck in the mindset shift. It is really hard to let go of formal academics. You are already feeling like the worst parent in the world. And then you've got to let go of school too. Like everybody, and then it's what everybody else thinks, right? Everybody already thinks that you're a terrible parent, that your kid is just spoiled, and if you just used a firmer approach with them, things would be okay. All of that judgment that you're like shouldering, then to do something even more radical, like homeschooling, and
Yeah.
then even more radical than homeschooling is schooling. At least that's our perception. That's society's perception, and you're just worn out. And so it's really hard for parents to let go of that and make the shift in their mindset toward natural learning actually can work. And so that's where we just need a lot of information and data, which is one thing we do. And then another thing that kind of like they get kind of stuck and sticky is like the fear that by doing this, like maybe they're okay with unschooling because they're just at that place, but they need it to only be for a certain amount of time so that their child doesn't fall behind. Right.
Mm.
Because like, what if like they just start here for a year or two and then I need them to go back to school? Are they going to be able to go back to school in whatever grade would have been chronologically appropriate for them at that time? And they get kind of stuck in the trying to solve for 2 years down the road when really we're like, let's bring it back to today and trust that this works. This does work. And then the other area that comes to mind when I think about this question is like whether or not the parent themselves is going to be able to manage this, right? Like, I'm not a teacher. I get this all the time. I'm not a teacher. I'm not qualified. I don't know how to do this. I don't even know where to start. Do I just let them go feral and like just be on screens all day long? Like, that doesn't feel good. And so those are kind of the three areas that I think are most prevalent for parents when they are accidental homeschoolers or accidental unschoolers. They're leaving the school system because of neurodivergence. They're leaving the school system because of PDA.
Accidental homeschoolers.
Yes.
Love it.
I'm an accidental homeschooler. I was not planning to do this.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's been a big gift for me and my kids, through the fire. But yeah. And then like the other part of your question about like the implementation of it, once they kind of get over their sticky place and they're ready to implement, okay, fine, we're just going to do this. I'm just going to trust that this works. It's really hard. Again, even if you've kind of started to shift your mindset of like, okay, I'm on board, but now what does this look like? Like, I want to go be in someone else's family that unschools and see like how this works and like shadow this other parent.
Yeah.
That's the part. The implementation does need, in my opinion, some kind of support from an in-person community, online community, other parents who have similar journeys, if not the same, and to be able to support one another and bounce ideas off of each other, like the implementation. The 90-minute school day process is almost like something to co-regulate the parent, right? Like, okay, got this system and it is going to keep me on track. And it's something that I can do forward planning or reverse planning, depending on where we are in that moment in that day.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about reverse planning, what that is, what that looks like? Maybe with an example of an anonymized client or that you've done with your daughter?
Sure. So I'll use my daughter because I have a plethora of examples she gives me every day. So what this looks like, maybe if it's okay with you, maybe I'll just walk through the framework really quick.
Yeah, please.
So the 90-minute school day is broken into pathways. I like to think of it as a hike, but then it's also, we're rebuilding our neural pathways, right? We're doing this healing work with our kids and ourselves. So we have 6 pathways towards a lifestyle of learning naturally with our kids. That's what it is. And so if you want to think about it as 6 pathways or 6 buckets, whatever you want to do, they're broken into 2 categories. One is content acquisition. So this is layered learning where we're just building knowledge over time. And we learn by experience and observation and testimony when things are like too small, like we think microscopic things, too far, you think of outer space, or away from us in time. And that's not my definition of learning. That's Alison Gopnik's. She wrote a great book called The Carpenter and the Gardener. I might have messed up the title, but it's kind of the gist of it. And so when we understand learning operates like that, the content acquisition is from experiences and our personal observation and what we read or communicate with others through testimony. And that builds over time. That's science, history, all that good stuff. Then the other category is our skill work that we need to become an autonomous learner. So we can learn without reading, especially in this day and age, but reading is really helpful. It's a great skill to develop. So is writing. Those two go hand in hand. And math. We need these things to be able to understand larger concepts as we stack the learning in the content. So those are the two categories of the 6 pathways. 3 pathways are content, and it does not need to be more than 20 minutes a day for the parent, right? The kids are learning all day long. You've got stuff to do, especially if you're working. And it's just like places that you can hold in your mind. Okay, I'm going to spend 20 minutes a day reading aloud with my child. And it can be reading from a book, it can be reading from picture books, it can be listening to a podcast together in the car, it can be watching a movie together. Like you're ingesting a storyline or an autobiographical or a biographical or nonfiction in some form or fashion alongside your kids because you're learning with them. Then there's conversation and dialogue that can spew off into new interests, right? So reading aloud is huge. And then the other thing that you do is morning time. Doesn't have to be in the morning. Probably could have named that different, but it is a term in the homeschooling communities that a lot of homeschoolers understand. And this is just like building your values and passing down your family's values, looking at your values versus other people's values for the purpose of compassion, understanding cultures and other things. And so the morning time or family time, we can call it, is really where out of burnout is really where this starts to take off because it's the rebuilding of the trust that has happened that you're able to offer things to expand horizons and to deepen character. So it can be reading fairy tales. It can be doing yoga together, things like that. Again, 20 minutes and it's invitational when we're doing this with a PDA.
Yeah.
And then the third content area is activities. And these are largely, especially when we're working with a PDA, you join them in their special interest, whatever it is. So if they're doing Roblox, you go over there, do Roblox. If they are working with Lego, you do Lego, whatever it is for 20 minutes, it's like special time. And in that is so much conversation and observation on your part of what is being learned. So those are the 3 areas where you build content acquisition and use strewing to expose your children to new ideas and concepts. And you have those conversations and dialogue that mature their character, right? That's over there. And then the 10 minutes pathways are our skill work, right? Reading, writing, and math. So for a PDA, it's happening. You just need to be able to recognize it. Like we just said with your son, how he was drawing. That's writing, that's storytelling, that's creative writing. It's happening. It doesn't look like writing a paragraph. He's doing that now. Like he will get there. And everybody learns at their own time, just like with potty training, just like with language development, just like with walking. Everybody's got a different point. And like reading outside of school, like natural reading, kids, if they're in a literature rich culture and environment in a home that values that, as long as there's not some sort of like mechanical reading disability, like they learn to read, but it's between 4 and 12 years old.
Oh, I love that.
So, parents get so nervous when we've got a 6 or 7-year-old that's not knowing how to read yet, but it's not even developmentally appropriate. Like we have such a push for early reading. They've done all kinds of studies. I think one was at a University of Tennessee that just showed like these early reading interventions that they're doing in preschools and kindergartens. Yeah, those kids learn to read earlier, but they're not ahead of the kids by the time they get to 4th or 5th grade than the ones who learn to read in 1st and 2nd grade. Like Finland, they don't start till they're about 1st, 2nd grade. So there's a lot of data that people don't know about to do all this. So that's kind of a breakdown of the 90 minutes. So it can look like sitting down and doing a math workbook, but you have to you respect your child and it has to be something that you've agreed to do together. Because it's when you try to make them do it. Anytime you have like certain words, like, how do I make them? How do I, and I do it too. When I catch myself thinking it, I'm like,
anytime I say, how do I, I'm like, no.
Yeah. Well, how do I do it to someone else is where we get into trouble, right? Like, how do I have control over me.
Yeah. So anecdotally, like before my son started at his private school, and he was very behind in reading. He actually didn't qualify for special education with his 2 autism diagnoses, but he did for reading. So there's the irony of the public school system. But I remember his special interest at the time was Beyblades, like these they look like little robotic things that you can pull and like they spin and they fight against each other and explode
Oh, this sounds fun.
in like an arena, plastic arena. And we would just do it over and over and over again. And of course, I had to make sure I didn't win because God forbid I did that. And then the nervous system would activate and the activity would stop. And this was like when he was coming out of burnout and would actually engage in some things other than screens with me. But he started to want to keep score and see how much he was beating me. And that was like, oh, this is math. Like, oh my God, math. Like he just said he wanted to do math. So it was like this opportunity through his special interest, as you said, and through the connection that we had been building over and over and over again, that's felt very tedious as
Mm-hmm.
a parent of like, okay, I'll play Beyblades again for an hour. I would do this every day. And then all of a sudden there's this opportunity for math,
Mm-hmm.
right? And again, like I can talk about it looking back, but I didn't have someone in my corner being like, that's what's supposed to be happening. Like,
Right.
yay,
Yeah.
you're on the right
You were like,
track.
I think this is working. I feel good about it, but I'm not sure, because we need that community aspect of things to help us in the implementation and maintenance phase. I love that story. It kind of reminded me of like last night at my house. My husband's out of town. I'm sitting on the couch with the kids. And let me preface this with my PDA is not in burnout. So we are in a good place most of the time, but she still has PDA because it's her neurotype. So I sit down and I'm just like kind of over them because it's just been a long day and I don't want to get into the whole who picks what we watch. And so we're eating dinner in front of the TV, like the awesome family that we are. And I decide I want to watch this like a Nat Geo, I think it's called like the Gold or something. It would popped up on Disney Plus, and it's looking for sunken treasure of the USS. I don't know. I don't remember the thing, but it like sunk in like the 1800s. It was in the 80s, and it has like millions of dollars of gold from the California gold rush on it. And so this guy is looking for it in the Atlantic. And I was like, oh, I want to watch this. So I turn it on and immediately, like everybody else is fine with it. My PDA, because it's loss of autonomy, right? So she's like,
You chose.
oh, but I picked it because she loves the Titanic. The Titanic is a special interest of hers. And I thought if I could just kind of like take the hits, because, she was regulated and it was like making a decision here to take the hits. And if she would just watch it for 3 minutes, I think she's going to get into it. And it's like following your intuition, right?
Yeah.
So just kind of she's tossing stuff's flying all over. It's like, I'm like, oh, okay, come on, keep paying attention to the screen, but her eyes are on it. And then all of a sudden she's like, oh my gosh, they're using sonar, like how they found the Titanic. And
You're
then the whole time she's watching, she's totally engaged. She didn't want to turn it off. New favorite show. And that's, how like all of a sudden we used her special interest at the Titanic. Now she's interested, and I've forgotten the name of the ship, but we're going to be watching it more. And then while she's watching, she's like watching how he plotted. So he plotted like a whole, and he used an algorithm to figure out the probability of the likelihood based on all of this research he had done of where this was in the Atlantic. And they found it. And so it was all this mathematics, and her head was exploding, and she was getting out paper and trying to figure it out and writing math and asking questions. And there we go. So like something she didn't want to do, but she was in a regulated state, tied it to her special interest. And then now she's interested in this. She wants to understand the math, the science, she's writing. It's all interrelated. And I'm trusting that her brain is sorting and compartmentalizing however it does.
Yeah.
And that's how she learns.
Yeah, I love it. So that would be both the 20 minutes of the
You got it.
testimony and 20 minutes of the math and
Yeah.
maybe writing skill also, right?
Yeah, I could probably let me use this example. I bet we could probably pull like the entire 90 minutes from this one thing. So it can all stack too, right? It's like habit stacking. So morning time was we were together, right? Because one thing I talked to my parents about is morning time is a place to bring in sensory input. So we're eating, right? We're eating, we're gathering together, we're breaking bread, we're watching screens. We have all this input, sensory input, and we're spending time together. And there was a lot of conversation throughout this documentary. And I find with documentaries and, any kind of thing that's more nonfiction related, the conversations, you don't get lost in the story. It starts sparks stuff. So that would be morning time, right? It's also a form of reading aloud because I also have captions going on all the screens. because that's a way that their brains are decoding behind the scenes. So we have that going. So that's reading aloud. And then it was an activity because it was a special interest of her. Thank God she finally bought into it, like about at the 5 minute part. And we spent that time together. And then she pulled out paper because she wanted to start mapping as she's watching. So she's writing and using numbers. And, I'm trusting that it makes sense to her because she was watching the plotting and algorithms on the screen. And she's brilliant. Like, I don't know. Like, I think she got the concept, which I think is super advanced for a 6-year-old.
Yeah.
And so that's reading and writing because she saw it on the screen. She's copying it down. And then there's the math component to that, right? And then she woke up this morning talking about it also and wanting to watch it again later. So this is how we can get a well-rounded first-class education that's person-centered and kind of proctor it.
That's such a great example. And it's like for the parents' nervous system, it's like, okay, like I did my half. Like that was my half. And then the other half is trusting that the learning is happening and that you're going to be building on it. And I love that.
Yeah. And it's easy, right? Doesn't that feel like so much easier than sitting down with curriculum and trying to figure out how to get them to like it?
Oh my God. I mean, I can't even imagine that with a PDA kid. It's just not, it doesn't work with PDA kids because as soon as we have an agenda, it's like they're going to do the opposite, even if it's something they're interested in because they're subconsciously perceiving it as threatening. And that's what can be so confusing because it's like, my son, two of his special interests are football and fishing. And it's like, logically, as a parent who was taking the step to homeschooling, I would be like, okay, like I'm going to do a math problem about dogs, or I'm going to do science about like, how a football flies. But it's like still curriculum first and just sprinkling in special interest. And even that is going to be rejected by a PDAer.
Yeah, they're going to perceive your agenda and it's not pure.
Yeah. And so it's like really going through the person and the interests rather than sprinkling it on to a more traditional curriculum.
Yeah, it's changing your mindset, how you look at learning. You see what they're doing. You trust that they're learning, and you do the work yourself to be able to identify that and document it if you need to for your state. But most of the time, parents don't need it and they just need it for themselves. Like, I am doing a good job. They are learning. I've got the proof because I've logged it here or here.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Wonderful. Okay. So I'm going to ask two more questions.
Okay.
As I've learned more about your framework, and this example illustrates this idea really well, I love that, it's not so extreme where it's like, okay, parent, you have to quit your job and spend all day, every day being a teacher.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit more about how a parent, and I know some parents have to work outside the home, like if they're a doctor or a nurse or an electrician or whatever it is, but some examples of how some parents, especially if they're working from home already or could have some time working from home, could incorporate this into their lifestyle without having to drop their career entirely.
Yeah. I have a lot of parents who are professionals and they are like therapists or doctors, and they have to be in a building, right? And where you can go with this is thinking about it like you think about summertime. Okay. School, wherever your child was in school or where you were planning on sending them, you are going to have to figure out a plan for summertime, right? For 3 months, you've got to figure out where they're going to be that you can keep them safe and, intellectually engaged while you're at work. Okay. So when we put it like that, automatically it kind of opens up and loosens the tense, like overwhelm that parents are feeling when they weren't planning to homeschool. How do I do this if I work full time, especially if I work out of the home? So it's like, that's for them to figure out because they have some kind of practice or understanding of how that would work, right? And then it's giving them permission to start thinking about and like let's use an example. So let's use an example that the parents are out of the home, they both work away from home. They have some sort of plan in the summertime for between family and a hired caregiver to provide that. So the learning, you can either like get these other caregivers on board, or you can just have those caregivers establish nervous system safety with your PDA, just like they would in the summertime. And you work on the supporting and fostering connections based on their interests. And you can use the 90-minute school day before and after you go to work. So we can think about meal times, we think about weekends, we think about any time that you're with your kids, you're learning with them, you're facilitating and you're logging it. So you can do it in the after hours. You know, you don't normally report to work until 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. You're home by 5, 6, 7 o'clock. You still have more than 90 minutes to spend with your kids. And just like in the example, like I got the full 90 minutes done in this, like, I don't even know if it was a 30-minute episode or hour episode, right?
Yeah.
And it's conducive to a family lifestyle because you're already learning with your kids. This is just helping you track it and you to be able to be a little bit more creative on how you intentionally strew things for your child educationally to expand their interests, right? Because they're going to make that leap. They're curious little creatures who want to learn more and more and more. We're just all wired that way. And so that's kind of where I would kind of point this parent in this example and help them see that. And it doesn't have to be like 90 minutes from start to finish. It can be like a 10-minute little dabble here where, you know, they asked a question about something and we pulled out a napkin and worked out the math formula, you know? And usually, like, if they're genuinely interested and you do that, they're just like, and like the next day, the caregiver will tell you, like, he or she spent all morning like scribbling around with all these numbers, right? Because
Yeah.
especially when they're interested, you want that mastery. That's part of like how we learn, is that intrinsic motivation to master something that we've just gotten really interested in. Like they'll do the work and they'll do the work in their play and pursuing their special interests during the day when you're not there, and you can trust that it's happening. And then you can continue to facilitate it in the hours and weekends that you have outside of it. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, that's awesome. Like I was thinking this would be more conducive to someone who's working from home, but I love that you're talking about even an example where like we both work outside of the home. Maybe we have a caregiver or family at home with our child while we're at work, and then we let go of worrying about observation specifically, unless our caregivers can do it for us, and really focus on those hours outside of our work.
Right. And if you're working at home, like I work at home, my husband works at home, but we have work schedules to do. We have meetings, like me and my husband's out of town. My kids are like watching TV and I'm trusting they're learning. I'll text you later, like what they did.
Yeah.
But like you set the parameters, like I don't have toddlers. So my children can be in the house while I'm in a meeting and keep themselves busy because we're not in burnout, and we have boundaries and we've worked on things. Like I trust that they're able to keep themselves occupied because this is our lifestyle. Like they're used to directing their time. They're in flow almost all day long. And that takes practice, especially when kids are coming out of the school system and they're used to adults directing their time. This is for neurotypical kids or neurodivergent kids. Like there is a kind of a deschooling approach for the child to just kind of unwind from, oh, I can decide what to do. And as a family, you work on making sure that it's, safe. But yeah. So it's very workable, and it just kind of takes figuring out your constraints, right? What you can't change, and then working with what you do have and kind of looking at it from all angles and partnering with your children in that, regardless of their age. Children want to be respected, and you're still the adult, right? You're still the one with more experience, but you can come at them like collaboratively.
Yeah, very cool. Very hopeful.
Yes.
And exciting. I could have used your expertise.
I could have used my expertise. I would love to teleport back and be like, girlfriend, let future you help you.
Yes.
You,
100%.
you wouldn't have as much gray hair.
Totally. But you wouldn't have your wisdom that you're sharing with us now.
Right. I earned these stripes the hard way.
Yes, as we do. So, last question for our listeners, what piece of advice or hopeful message do you have for parents listening who might be considering bringing their PDA child or teen home from school for the first time?
Yeah, it's scary. And like with anything new and scary, like your first job, right? Or, when you have to learn something, or maybe you have to public speak for the first time, it's nerve-wracking, it's scary, it's the unknown. And that's how it is for you and your kid. So, like, just acknowledging that, giving yourself a lot of self-compassion, and knowing that learning is not linear. Like, just like kids learning how to walk, how many times do toddlers fall before they nail it, right? But each time they fall, their body and their brain are working together to figure out how to do it longer next time. And so embracing fear as a guide instead of something to avoid, I think is super helpful and hopeful to give parents. This anxiety that you're feeling about this is like a clue to you that you need to be prepared. And so, to whatever degree you can help yourself with podcasts or research or talking to someone or getting a coach or joining some sort of training, do that. That will help you feel more equipped and confident. Join a community, call someone, support yourself, and then don't beat yourself up when you fail, because it's not failure. It's like a really good lesson. And just like we talked about, like how you and I both do the work we do today, because it was like fraught with lots of missteps and sliding backward. And that's how we learn. And our kids watching that's model, right? Resilience. It's because your nervous system oftentimes mirrors theirs. So if they're burned out, you're burned out. And so it's, I guess, to kind of like sew it all up nicely, what I would say is like, trust yourself. Trust that this is the next right step. Take it one day at a time. Learning is not linear, and the failures are part of the journey. And you're going to make less and less as you get your confidence and your skills up.
Yeah. And your kid will learn.
Oh, yeah. They're already learning. We're just not recognizing it.
Yeah. I think that was the hardest thing for me to believe when my son was in burnout and leading up to it, was just like, he's not learning anything. And I think there was a period where he wasn't taking in information because he was just like so in his survival brain.
Right. You can't learn when you're in your survival brain. Like they've said that what you're doing is you're operating off of your reflexes, right? And your survival mechanisms. And so we need to establish safety for the nervous system, right? That felt safety and so if a screen does that for your kid, like, have at it, kiddo. But then once we start feeling safer, we start to ingest the information, right?
Yeah.
And then you have that moment where he's drawing robots, or you have that moment where, they come to you and they have like something really profound. You're like, whoa, where'd you learn that? Oh, I heard it on such and such that I was watching. It's like, oh, you are learning.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, all those moments came as such a huge surprise to me when it happened. But yeah, and it's going through that fear of life.
You have to walk through it. If you avoid the fear and you try to like you think about internal family systems, like if you try to like avoid it by managing it and putting down control, then you're just activating their nervous system, which activates yours. Or if you try to douse it, you're not getting the tools to navigate, right? These really stressful things. And it's when you walk through it side by side, you grow as a person, and your kids do too. And you can move through it. But it's not a quick fix.
No, it's not.
And your child has a nervous system disability. Like, it's an invisible disability. Like, it's not something that you can fix in your child, but you can repair and heal their nervous system for day-to-day operation. And just know to set yourself up in your family. Like my other kids know, we have to approach her with equality and give her choice and governance over the situation to the degree that we can. And that's just how we can support her. And then we all support one another and all of our other quirky ways that we got going on in my house.
Yeah. Yeah. Understood. This is wonderful, and it's going to be so helpful to parents. I'm so excited to share it with the community. And I'm just so happy that we got to collaborate on this. Thank you for coming on to the podcast and answering all our questions.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for all the work you do, Casey. Like, you're changing so many lives by helping parents move through burnout, right? And understanding their PDA. I thank you from my own parenting journey. You're like really changing lives with helping with PDA. So I'm just so thrilled to be here and collaborate with you.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for being here with me at the At Peace Parents podcast. This is your source for all things related to understanding, supporting, accommodating, and advocating for your PDA child. To go deeper on any of these topics, check out my course offerings and masterclasses at the website www.atpeaceparents.com. To completely transform the way you think about and relate to your child and to bring peace and stability to your home, join us for the next cohort of the Paradigm Shift program.